In March 1998, the quiet town of Gainesville, Florida, found itself at the center of one of the most shocking crime stories in modern American history. Judias Anna Lou Judy Buenoano, a 54-year-old woman once seen as a loving mother and hard-working nurse's aide, was preparing to take her final walk to Florida's electric chair. To many, she was just another woman from a small town. But behind that facade was a calculated killer the media would later call the Black Widow. For nearly 2 decades, Judy had hidden a sinister secret. Her husband, James Goodyear, a decorated Air Force sergeant, her longtime boyfriend, Bobby Joe Morris, and even her own disabled son, Michael, all met mysterious and violent deaths. Each time, Judy quietly cashed in life insurance policies, collecting thousands while friends and neighbors offered sympathy, never suspecting the woman they trusted was orchestrating a series of cold, methodical murders. But Judy's thirst for money didn't stop there. When her next lover, John Gentry, started questioning her behavior, Judy tried to poison him. And when that didn't work fast enough, she planted a car bomb meant to finish the job. Miraculously, Gentry survived, and what investigators uncovered next would expose a chilling pattern of greed and murder spanning from Florida to Colorado. The case gripped the nation. Here was a mother, a caregiver, someone who seemed so ordinary, revealed as one of America's most dangerous female killers. After countless investigations, trials, and years of appeals, Judy's time finally ran out. On March 30th, 1998, she became the first woman executed in Florida since 1848 and the first woman electrocuted in the United States since the 1970s. Her last meal was shockingly modest: steamed broccoli, asparagus, strawberries, and tomato wedges with hot tea and lemon. And when asked for any final words, she looked at the warden and simply said, "No, sir." To understand how a seemingly ordinary woman became one of the most notorious female killers in American history, and how a lifetime of lies, violence, and greed led her to the electric chair, we have to go back to the beginning. But first, hit subscribe and tap the notification bell, because this case isn't just a story of crime and punishment. It's a chilling reminder of how evil can wear the most unsuspecting face. Early life and background. Born Judias Anna Lou Welty on April 4th, 1943, in the small rural town of Quanah, Texas, Judy's early years were marked by hardship and instability. When her mother died tragically at the age of 4, Judy and her younger brother were sent to live with their grandparents, a temporary refuge that ended when their father remarried. The family relocated to Roswell, New Mexico, where Judy's childhood quickly descended into a nightmare. According to records and later psychological evaluations, she suffered severe abuse at the hands of her father and stepmother: beatings, starvation, forced labor, and constant humiliation. By the time she was a teenager, the abuse had hardened her. At 14 years old, in a fit of desperation and rage, Judy attacked her family by throwing scalding hot grease, an act that landed her in juvenile detention for several months before being sent to a reform school until she graduated in 1960. A childhood marked by abandonment, abuse, and instability often leaves deep psychological scars, explains a forensic psychologist. For some individuals, it creates patterns of emotional detachment and a need for control, traits that, if left unchecked, can manifest in destructive, even violent behaviors later in life. In Judy's case, those early experiences likely laid the foundation for the manipulative and cold-blooded decisions she would make as an adult. After her release from reform school, Judy attempted to rebuild a sense of normalcy. She found work as a nursing aide, where coworkers described her as quiet, hardworking, and unassuming, a woman trying to move on from her painful past. But beneath that calm exterior, something darker was brewing. In 1961, at just 18 years old, she gave birth to her first and only child, Michael, a baby boy she would later raise alone. To the outside world, Judy appeared to be a young mother making her way in the world. In reality, this marked the beginning of a complex and ultimately tragic story that would span decades. The first death, husband James Goodyear. By the late 1960s, Judy's life seemed to be taking a turn for the better. She met U.S. Air Force Sergeant James Goodyear, a disciplined, respected serviceman who had just returned from duty in Vietnam. The two married and settled in Orlando, Florida, where neighbors would later describe them as the picture of a quiet, hard-working young family. But in September 1971, just a few short months after Goodyear returned home, he suddenly fell gravely ill. He suffered intense nausea, vomiting, and unexplained weakness, symptoms that baffled doctors. Within days, despite being admitted to the Orlando Naval Hospital, Sergeant Goodyear was dead. At the time, no one questioned his passing. No toxicology tests were performed, and his death was attributed to natural causes, possibly tied to stress or illness contracted overseas. Looking back, the symptoms James experienced were textbook indicators of arsenic poisoning: persistent gastrointestinal distress, rapid organ deterioration, and sudden collapse, explains a forensic toxicologist. When investigators exhumed his body in 1984, the analysis was conclusive. James Goodyear had high levels of arsenic built up in his tissues, evidence of chronic poisoning administered slowly over time. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate, calculated murder. While her husband's friends and colleagues mourned the tragic loss of a decorated veteran, Judy quietly began cashing in on his death. She received a substantial life insurance payout, as well as additional veterans' benefits, reportedly totaling more than $108,000, a significant sum at the time. With that money, Judy purchased new possessions, maintained her household, and began building the foundation of a life that, to those around her, appeared stable and respectable, even as the first cracks in her deadly facade began to form. As the narration unfolds, the screen fills with visuals: archival photographs of James Goodyear in uniform, black and white images of the Orlando Naval Hospital, and a somber dramatization of his funeral. A folded American flag handed to Judy, her face expressionless, as the bugle plays in the background. Moments later, documents flash across the screen: insurance policies, bank statements, and veterans' benefit forms, symbolizing the financial windfall Judy quietly secured while those closest to her struggled to make sense of James's untimely death. The boyfriend, Bobby Joe Morris. After the death of her husband James Goodyear and the sizable insurance payouts that followed, Judy seemed eager for a fresh start. She left Florida and relocated to Trinidad, Colorado, where she quickly began a relationship with Bobby Joe Morris, a charming, hardworking man who believed he had found love with a devoted partner. But within months, the same sinister pattern began to emerge. Friends and neighbors would later recall how Bobby Joe, once vibrant and healthy, started experiencing persistent nausea, vomiting, and sudden bouts of weakness that doctors couldn't explain. Then, in January 1978, Bobby Joe collapsed and died suddenly. His death, like Goodyear's before him, was initially attributed to natural causes. It wasn't until years later, when investigators reopened the case, that toxicology tests revealed lethal levels of arsenic in his system, evidence of prolonged poisoning that matched the horrifying blueprint of Judy's earlier crime. Insurance payouts. In the weeks following Bobby Joe's death, Judy, once again, wasted no time cashing in. She collected an estimated $77,000 in insurance payouts, using the money to secure her financial stability while those closest to Bobby Joe grieved the inexplicable loss of a man they loved. Friends would later admit they were shocked by how quickly Judy seemed to move on, showing little to no visible grief, just as she had after James Goodyear's death. Criminal investigator. When we started piecing together the deaths of James Goodyear and Bobby Joe Morris, recalls a veteran investigator familiar with the case, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Two healthy men, in two different states, both falling mysteriously ill, both dying under nearly identical symptoms, and both leaving behind life insurance policies naming Judy as the sole beneficiary. It was chilling because it showed us we weren't dealing with random tragedy. We were looking at a deliberate, calculated predator who understood how to exploit trust and who used her relationships as a hunting ground for financial gain. The consistency of the symptoms, the timing of the policies, and the rapidity with which she claimed the payouts were the early red flags that tied everything together and set the stage for a much larger investigation into her deadly pattern. The son, Michael Goodyear. By 1980, Judy's son, Michael Goodyear, had grown into a bright but fragile young man. Life had not been easy for him. A childhood illness left him partially paralyzed, forcing him to rely on metal leg braces that made even the simplest tasks a challenge. To everyone who knew Michael, his mother Judy was his rock, the one constant in a world that often treated him differently. But on May 13, 1980, everything changed. On what was supposed to be a peaceful canoe outing in Milton, Florida, Michael tragically drowned when the canoe overturned in the calm waters of a small river. What was first written off as a horrific accident began to unravel when investigators dug deeper. Autopsy reports later showed traces of arsenic poisoning in Michael's system, evidence that he had been systematically poisoned in the weeks leading up to his death, leaving him too weak to save himself when the canoe tipped. Detectives concluded that Judy had not only orchestrated the incident, but had either allowed or even pushed her disabled son into the water to ensure he would never make it back to shore. In the weeks that followed, Judy once again demonstrated the cold precision that had defined her earlier crimes. She filed claim after claim on Michael's life insurance policies, walking away with more than $100,000 in combined payouts, money that she quickly used to sustain her lifestyle, as if her only child had not just been laid to rest. The car bomb and attempted murder, John Gentry. By the early 1980s, Judy had once again reinvented herself, this time as the charming companion of John Gentry, a successful Florida businessman who believed he had found love. To outsiders, Judy and John appeared to be the perfect couple. She, the devoted partner. He, the generous boyfriend, eager to please. But beneath the surface, Judy had already begun setting the stage for yet another deadly scheme. In 1983, as the relationship deepened, John began to experience strange and debilitating symptoms: nausea, dizziness, and unexplained weakness. Symptoms eerily similar to those that had preceded the deaths of James Goodyear, Bobby Joe Morris, and Michael. Judy explained it away, encouraging John to keep taking the vitamin supplements she had personally prepared for him, capsules she claimed would help improve his health. But Judy's plan took a more violent turn on June 25, 1983. That evening, as John started his car outside his home, a deafening explosion ripped through the vehicle, hurling him onto the pavement. Miraculously, John survived, but the attack raised immediate suspicions. During his recovery, investigators tested the so-called vitamins Judy had been giving him, discovering that they were laced with arsenic and paraformaldehyde, a deadly concoction intended to slowly poison him before the car bomb delivered the fatal blow. Investigation. The car bombing was the break investigators needed. Detectives began to scrutinize Judy's past, uncovering a disturbing trail of death and insurance claims stretching back more than a decade. With mounting evidence, authorities exhumed the bodies of James Goodyear, Bobby Joe Morris, and even her son, Michael. Toxicology reports confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Each man had been systematically poisoned with arsenic before their deaths. The pattern was undeniable: a manipulative predator exploiting those closest to her for financial gain. Each murder carefully planned and executed with chilling precision. Charges and convictions. The evidence was overwhelming, and by 1984, Judy Buenoano was arrested and charged in connection with the car bombing. She was convicted of attempted second-degree murder for the attempt on John Gentry's life and sentenced to life in prison, a sentence compounded by an additional conviction for the murder of her son, Michael, ensuring she would never walk free again. But prosecutors weren't finished. In 1985, following the exhumation and forensic testing of James Goodyear's remains, Judy was convicted of first-degree murder in her husband's death and sentenced to death. The once respected nurse's aide and mother of one now carried the label of a serial killer, a predator whose greed and manipulation had destroyed everyone who trusted her. For investigators, it was the grim validation of years of painstaking work, and the beginning of a long legal battle that would ultimately take Judy Buenoano all the way to Florida's death chamber. Trial and appeals. Archival clips and still images flash across the screen. Judy Buenoano sitting stiffly in the courtroom, dressed in a muted blazer, her face revealing little emotion. Prosecutors laying out evidence with chilling precision. Family members of her victims quietly sobbing as the jury listens in stunned silence. By the mid-1980s, the case against Judy Buenoano had become one of the most sensational trials in Florida history, captivating the nation with its twisted tale of greed, manipulation, and calculated murder. Prosecutors meticulously presented their evidence, connecting each death to a disturbing pattern of arsenic poisoning, fraudulent insurance payouts, and Judy's cold, methodical planning. The jury, faced with overwhelming evidence, from the toxicology reports that revealed lethal levels of arsenic to financial documents showing her swift collection of insurance money after each death, deliberated for only a few hours before finding her guilty of first-degree murder in the death of her husband, James Goodyear. When the sentence of death by electrocution was handed down, Judy sat motionless, her expression unreadable. But the legal battle was far from over. Over the next decade, Judy and her defense team filed a series of appeals in both state and federal courts, each one aiming to overturn her conviction or at least delay her execution. Among the most notable claims was that her defense counsel had been compromised, allegedly distracted by lucrative offers for book and movie rights related to her case, a potential conflict of interest that she argued had denied her a fair trial. Her attorneys also cited discrepancies in the FBI lab analyses of toxicology evidence and claimed that some testing procedures were flawed or improperly documented. Despite these arguments, appellate courts consistently upheld her conviction, ruling that the evidence against Judy was overwhelming and that any alleged errors during the trial were not substantial enough to change the outcome. Judges described her actions as deliberate, methodical, and motivated solely by greed, reinforcing the narrative that Judy was a manipulative predator who preyed upon those closest to her for financial gain. Legal expert interview. A case like Judy Buenoano's is extremely difficult to overturn on appeal, explains one legal analyst. The courts examined every angle, from claims of ineffective assistance of counsel to questions about the integrity of forensic evidence. But in the end, the weight of the evidence, the insurance payouts, the toxicology reports, the consistent pattern of arsenic poisoning, left virtually no room for reasonable doubt. Even if certain aspects of the trial were flawed, they were not enough to undermine the jury's verdict or the death sentence that followed. By the late 1990s, after exhausting every possible legal avenue, including petitions to the Florida Supreme Court, federal habeas corpus filings, and last-minute stays of execution, Judy's fate was sealed. The woman once known as a devoted mother and caregiver was now firmly etched into history as one of America's most cold-blooded female serial killers, her appeals failing one by one as the clock inexorably ticked toward the day of her execution. Final hours. Last meal and last words. Slow pans over the Florida State Prison. The rising sun casting long shadows over the razor wire fences, followed by still images of the electric chair, stark and cold, sitting in the death chamber. On the morning of March 30th, 1998, the grim chapter of Judy Buenoano's life came to a close inside the heavily guarded walls of Florida State Prison. At 54 years old, she would become the first woman executed in Florida since 1848 and only the third woman executed in the United States since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. Reporters and witnesses gathered outside the prison as the hours ticked away. While inside, Judy spent her last night quietly, refusing all interviews and declining to see any clergy, maintaining the same stoic silence that had defined her throughout her 15 years on death row. As dawn broke, prison officials prepared for the execution. Judy was offered her last meal, a modest and understated choice of steamed broccoli, asparagus, fresh strawberries, tomato wedges, and hot tea with lemon. Witnesses later noted that, unlike other inmates who indulged in extravagant Last Suppers, Judy's simple selection seemed to reflect her detached demeanor, her quiet acceptance of what was to come. Shortly after 7 a.m., Judy was escorted to the execution chamber, her wrists and ankles restrained as she was seated in the oak electric chair, ominously nicknamed Old Sparky. The room fell silent as the warden read the death warrant aloud and asked the condemned woman if she had any last words. In a calm, almost indifferent tone, Judy looked straight ahead and said only "No, sir." Those would be the final words ever spoken by the woman once dubbed the Black Widow. At 7:08 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the executioner flipped the switch, sending a surge of 2,000 volts of electricity coursing through her body. Witnesses reported seeing a wisp of smoke curl up from her right leg, the leather strap singeing slightly during the 38-second process. By 7:13 a.m., prison officials pronounced Judy Buenoano dead, her face still impassive, giving away nothing about the countless secrets and lies that had defined her life. With that, the long and chilling saga of Judy Buenoano, the nurse, the caregiver, the mother turned murderer, came to a violent end. But even in her final moments, she remained as cold and silent as ever, never offering remorse, never explaining why she betrayed the trust of those closest to her. Her death marked not only the conclusion of one of Florida's most infamous cases, but also a haunting reminder of how deception, greed, and violence can hide behind even the calmest of smiles. If you found this documentary on Judy Buenoano, the chilling story of betrayal, greed, and calculated murder, informative and thought-provoking, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe justice was truly served? And if you want to keep exploring the darkest corners of true crime, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Crime Report Network. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the most shocking cases from history to modern day. Your support helps us continue bringing you well-researched, in-depth, and gripping true crime documentaries every week.